The blood was still drying on the marble when the oracle gave the pronouncement. Absolution required a decade of impossible labors under the command of the most contemptible man in Greece. This was not a hero's quest, but a slave's impossible penance, and the first monster, the impervious Nemean Lion, was already waiting.
Our story begins not on Olympus, but in Thebes. Heracles, originally named Alcaeus, was the divine son of Zeus, who had tricked the mortal woman Alcmene. This illicit union immediately drew the eternal, burning wrath of Zeus's wife, Hera. Even before his birth, Hera attempted to thwart his destiny, delaying his arrival so that his cousin Eurystheus could claim the title of High King, thus setting the stage for the life of servitude that would later define Heracles' existence.
Hera's malice manifested quickly. When Heracles was just an infant, she sent 2 venomous serpents into his cradle. Instead of crying in terror, the infant demonstrated his innate godlike strength. He calmly grasped the vipers, crushing the life out of them in his tiny fists. His mortal foster father, Amphitryon, was terrified, but Alcmene immediately recognized the undeniable divinity of her son. This act solidified his destiny as a hero, destined for greatness, but also great suffering.
Growing up, Heracles received the best education afforded to a prince, taught archery by Eurytus, wrestling by Autolycus, and music by Linus, the brother of Orpheus. It was in music where his uncontrollable temper first surfaced. When Linus dared to correct him, Heracles struck him with his lyre, killing his teacher instantly. For this rash murder, Amphitryon exiled him to live among the herdsmen, where Heracles spent his adolescence, further perfecting his unrivaled physical prowess. After earning great honor defending Thebes, Heracles was rewarded with his first wife, Megara, daughter of King Creon, and they had several children. But peace was not in the demigod's nature, nor was it acceptable to Hera. In a horrific stroke of divine madness sent by the jealous goddess, Heracles hallucinated, believing his wife and children to be monstrous enemies. In this fugue state, he slew them all. When he awoke, the immense guilt nearly drove him to suicide. Seeking purification and penance for his unforgivable crime, Heracles consulted the oracle at Delphi. She decreed that he must submit entirely to the will of King Eurystheus of Mycenae, the weak but lawful king who had been granted power instead of Heracles. The oracle also renamed him Heracles, meaning the glory of Hera, a twisted irony. This servitude was the only path to purification, and it would ultimately lead to immortality. He was ordered to complete 10 labors, a number later increased to 12.
Eurystheus's first demand was simple yet impossible: kill the Nemean Lion, a beast whose hide was impervious to mortal weapons. Heracles first tried his bow and bronze sword, to no avail. Realizing brute force was necessary, he cornered the massive creature in its cave. He used his immense strength to wrestle the beast bare-handed, choking it to death. He used one of the lion's own claws to skin it, adopting the impenetrable hide as his signature armor and its head as his helmet.
The second task was to slay the Lernaean Hydra, a swamp serpent that grew 2 new heads for every one severed. Hera, hoping to ensure his defeat, sent a giant crab, Carcinos, to distract him. Aided by his nephew, Iolaus, Heracles engaged the beast. While Heracles cut the heads, Iolaus immediately cauterized the stumps with firebrands, preventing regeneration. Finally, Heracles severed the one immortal head and buried it under a massive rock. He then dipped his arrows in the Hydra's deadly venom, creating a lethal weapon.
Next, Heracles was ordered to capture the Lernaean hind alive. This deer was sacred to Artemis, possessed golden antlers and bronze hooves, and was incredibly swift. Heracles could not harm it, or he would incur the goddess's wrath. He pursued the hind for an entire year across Greece, following its path until he finally cornered it near the river Ladon in Arcadia. He carefully wounded it with an arrow just enough to stop it, capturing it alive and presenting it to Eurystheus. The fourth task required the capture of the terrifying Erymanthian boar, a massive creature that ravaged the countryside. While searching for the boar, Heracles visited the centaur Pholus and inadvertently caused a tragic conflict by opening a jar of wine sacred to the centaurs, leading to a disastrous brawl and the death of many of Pholus's brethren, including the wise Chiron. Heracles then successfully chased the boar up the snowy slopes of Mount Erymanthus until it was exhausted, trapping it in a net and carrying it back to Mycenae.
This labor was designed to humiliate Heracles, cleaning the stables of King Aegeus, which housed thousands of cattle and had not been cleaned in 30 years. Instead of shoveling the mountainous filth, Heracles employed engineering genius. He diverted the courses of two nearby rivers, the Alpheus and the Peneus, routing them through the stables to wash away the waste. Eurystheus, hearing that Heracles had tried to claim payment for the task, declared this labor void, increasing his required servitude. The Stymphalian birds nested near Lake Stymphalus and possessed beaks, claws, and feathers of bronze, which they used as deadly projectile weapons. The dense forest and swamp made approaching them impossible. Athena, recognizing Heracles' predicament, gave him a pair of bronze castanets or rattles, crafted by Hephaestus. Heracles clapped these loudly, driving the birds into the air, where they could be shot down with his arrows, now poisoned with the Hydra's venom.
The next 6 labors took Heracles far from the Peloponnese. The 7th task was to capture the Cretan bull, the magnificent beast that had fathered the Minotaur. King Minos readily agreed to the capture, as the bull was causing massive destruction across Crete. Heracles cornered the fiery animal, wrestled it into submission using his bare hands, and then sailed across the Aegean Sea, riding the bull's back, delivering the beast to Eurystheus. Heracles traveled to Thrace to capture the mares of Diomedes, 4 savage, man-eating horses owned by the giant king Diomedes. Heracles successfully stole the mares, but during a battle with Diomedes and his army, Heracles' companion, Abderus, was devoured by the beasts. Enraged, Heracles defeated Diomedes, feeding the king to his own mares. Once they had consumed human flesh, the horses were mysteriously tame, allowing Heracles to lead them back to Mycenae. For the 9th labor, Heracles was tasked with retrieving the golden girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons. Hippolyta was initially receptive to Heracles' request, impressed by his fame. However, Hera, disguised as an Amazon, spread a rumor that Heracles intended to kidnap the queen. A brutal battle ensued. Heracles, believing he had been tricked, killed Hippolyta and seized the girdle, barely escaping the fierce warrior women. The 10th labor was the most remote yet, retrieving the red cattle of the giant Geryon, who lived on the far western island of Erythea. To cross the massive desert of Libya, Heracles angrily shot an arrow at Helios, the sun god, who, impressed by his audacity, gifted him the great golden cup used to sail across the ocean. After reaching Erythea, Heracles killed Geryon's herdsman Eurytion and the 2-headed dog Orthrus, before killing the 3-bodied giant Geryon himself. The long journey back to Greece, driving the huge herd, was an epic adventure in itself. The 11th labor was retrieving the golden apples from the garden of the Hesperides, guarded by the dragon Ladon. Heracles first had to find the location, forcing the sea god Nereus to reveal the way. The journey led him to Atlas, who held the heavens upon his shoulders. Heracles offered to temporarily hold the sky in exchange for Atlas retrieving the apples. Upon returning, Atlas tried to trick Heracles into permanent sky-holding, but Heracles tricked him back, regaining the weight and fleeing with the apples. The final labor, the greatest test of all, was bringing the 3-headed dog Cerberus, guardian of the underworld, to Eurystheus. Heracles entered the realm of Hades through a cavern, protected by the guidance of Hermes and Athena. He spoke directly to Hades, who agreed to release Cerberus only if Heracles could master him without the aid of weapons. After a fierce, desperate struggle, Heracles overpowered the monstrous hound, dragging the snarling creature up into the sunlight before the terrified king Eurystheus.
With the successful completion of the 12 labors, Heracles was finally purified and freed from servitude, but his wandering, conflicted life continued. He attempted to win Iole, daughter of King Eurytus of Ocalia, in an archery contest, which he won easily. However, Eurytus, fearing Heracles' history of madness, refused to hand over his daughter. This rejection fueled a renewed anger in the hero.
When Heracles consulted the Oracle of Delphi regarding the pain in his life, she refused to speak to the man stained by murder. In a fit of rage, Heracles attempted to steal the sacred Delphic tripod, the seat of the Pythia, intending to set up his own oracle. Apollo intervened, leading to a physical struggle between the two powerful sons of Zeus. Only Zeus's direct intervention with a thunderbolt could separate them, forcing Heracles to return the tripod and submit to the oracle's new demand.
The oracle, seeking retribution for the death of Iphitus, Eurytus' son, whom Heracles killed in a fit of rage, commanded Heracles to serve Queen Omphale of Lydia for 3 years, effectively selling himself into slavery to repay the blood debt. This period is famous for its reversal of roles. Omphale forced the mighty hero to wear women's clothing and perform feminine tasks, while she wore the Nemean Lion pelt and carried his olive club. This humiliation was the price of his final purification. During his travels, Heracles arrived at Troy, where King Laomedon had refused to pay the promised reward for saving his daughter, Hesione, from a sea monster. Heracles, assembling an army, sacked Troy decades before the famous war of Achilles and Agamemnon. He killed Laomedon and all his sons, except for the young Priam, who was allowed to ascend the throne. This act highlights the hero's willingness to wage war when promises were broken.
Seeking a suitable wife after his penance, Heracles competed for the hand of Deianira, daughter of King Oeneus. His rival was the river god, Achelous, who had the power of metamorphosis. The contest was a wrestling match, during which Achelous transformed into a serpent and then a bull. Heracles proved too strong, famously breaking off one of Achelous' horns, a horn later associated with the cornucopia. Having defeated the river god, Heracles married Deianira.
While traveling with his new wife, they encountered the centaur Nessus, who offered to ferry Deianira across the raging river Euvenus. Nessus immediately tried to rape her. Heracles, seeing the assault from the opposite bank, shot the centaur with a hydra-poisoned arrow. Dying, Nessus advised Deianira that his blood, mixed with his semen, was a powerful love charm. He told her to collect it, ensuring Heracles would never stray. Deianira, fearing Heracles' wandering eye, secretly stored the venomous blood.
After his 3 years with Omphale, Heracles returned, continuing his heroic deeds. However, the story of his murder of Iphitus, which had led to his servitude, still resonated. Zeus had punished Heracles for his transgression against his host guest rights. Although purified from the divine madness, Heracles still carried the burden of his temper, and his path was littered with necessary yet regrettable conflicts.
Even after his freedom, the legacy of Heracles remained complex. His children, the Heraclidae, were constantly persecuted by Eurystheus, who feared the bloodline that might one day seize the throne of Mycenae. This struggle extended well beyond Heracles' life, leading to the mythological foundation of the Dorian invasion and the eventual return of the Heraclidae to the Peloponnese, centuries later.
Years later, Heracles defeated King Eurytus and finally captured Iole, the princess he had won in the archery contest long ago. He sent his herald, Lycus, to his wife Deianira to retrieve a specific white robe suitable for a sacrifice he intended to make to Zeus on Mount Olympus. Deianira, hearing that Heracles was bringing home a younger, more beautiful woman, Iole, feared losing his love and decided to use the love charm given to her by the dying Nessus.
Liches delivered the robe, ignorant of its venomous coating. As Heracles stood on Mount Ida, offering his sacrifice to Zeus, the heat from the altar activated the hydra-poisoned blood of Nessus, which had now fully saturated the wool. The robe adhered instantly to his skin, and the venom began to burn the flesh off his bones. He realized, too late, that Deianira's jealousy had been manipulated by the dying centaur, orchestrating his death years after the injury.
In unimaginable agony, Heracles sought something to lash out at. He seized the innocent herald, Lichas, who had brought the garment. In a final display of his terrible strength, Heracles threw Lichas far across the sea, where he fell and died upon the rocks, later turning into a stone formation. Realizing his suffering was unstoppable, Heracles returned home, only to find that Deianira, having witnessed the horror and realizing her tragic mistake, had taken her own life.
Knowing the pain was unbearable and his body was failing, Heracles ordered his attendants to carry him to the peak of Mount Oda. He instructed his son Hylas to build a massive funeral pyre. Unable to find anyone willing to light the fire and end his suffering, he offered his famous bow and poisoned arrows to the shepherd Philoctes, or Poeas, who finally ignited the wood. As the mortal body of Heracles was consumed by the flame, a cloud descended.
The fire purified the hero, burning away the last vestiges of his mortal, suffering self. Zeus brought forth a chariot, and the immortal spirit of Heracles was borne to Olympus. There he was finally received by the gods. He reconciled with Hera, who adopted him as her son, ending the millennia-long feud. Heracles, now fully a god, was granted eternal life and married Hebe, the goddess of youth, finding ultimate peace after a life of unending labor and profound tragedy.